Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Depends upon where you are in this world. This is Bill Gustin with a special edition of Humpday Hangout. Today it will be construction concerns, and I name that after a feature that is in the fire engineering webpage on a regular basis that is written by Greg Havel, who happens to be one of our guests today. Greg has a very colorful and admirable career in the construction and fire service industries, and he is going to be one of our guests today. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about myself, but I want you to know that as usual, I'm here with my I got my Lucky Auto Car squad, like my dad used to ride in Chicago, and we are being sponsored by Fire Engineering Magazine. The January edition is packed with building construction articles. And one of the best articles is written by one of our guests today, Chief Walter Nugent from Maplewood Fire Department in New Jersey. And he's going to talk about a fire that he had in a wood frame monster, or as our professor Glenn Corbett would say, toothpick towers. I have been in the fire service for 44 years. In March, I'll have 40 years on with the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Department, and I'm technical editor for fire engineering. And at FDIC this year, I will be teaching a classroom session on standpipes and a 4-hour pre-conference workshop on operations for newly promoted company officers. So to my left, I don't know how it appears to you, but I'm going to have Chief Walter make a brief introduction, a little bit about himself. And then after Chief Walter, it'll be Captain Mike. We actually have two Captain Mikes today. So Chief Nugent, sir.
Fire department. I also have a background in code enforcement, doing a fire marshal, my fire investigation certification, my CFI, my CFEI on that. I do have the construction experience on New Jersey. We call it fire HHS for inspecting the buildings during construction. Right now, I'm not actually using that, but having the construction experience as far as the inspection process helps you out in the field, of course, on things like all the businesses that you might come across. And recently, adjunct professor at Jersey City University. It's good to get back into the classroom, but on the different end right now, teaching the strategies and tactics course this semester from Anthony Villa's book, one of the fire engineering publications you have out there. Thanks, Bill.
All right. Thanks, Chief Walter. And you know, this was short notice. We put this together, and I really appreciate you being on. So, Captain Mike, the first Captain Mike, the better looking of the two Captain Mikes. You guys figure it out. And
oh, that's the guy from New York for sure.
Yeah. Captain Mike Dugan from FDNY. Captain Mike.
Hi, my name is Mike Dugan. I'm a retired captain from the FDNY. I'm still doing a lot of work in the city of New York with construction, understanding construction, the buildings in New York City and things that are under there, the training for the people who are responsible in New York City. And I am definitely not the better looking Mike, but I just have a bigger mouth than the other Mike. So I will introduce my brother, Michael Posner from Miami-Dade. Thanks for having us, Bill.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. Captain Mike Posner, just retired, 30 years with Miami-Dade Fire Rescue. Still active with the department, though. A reserve captain, still teaching elevators and officer development with the good Captain Gustin. Anytime I can get back down there and keep involved. Looking forward to today.
And James from the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm James Johnson. I work for Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services up in Vancouver, British Columbia. My background before I got into the fire service is in the construction trades. Here in Canada, I have the designation as a Red Seal journeyman carpenter. So I did a full apprenticeship. And yeah, I'm involved with IFF Canada and some of the initiatives they do for the building code work. Just started writing a monthly column for Fire Rescue magazine on building construction, and it's just one of the passion things for me. So happy to be involved in the conversation today.
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to Fire Rescue magazine. It is under the Penwell Fire Group umbrella, and it's not in any competition with fire engineering or any other magazine. It's written from a different point of view, but it's an interesting point of view. They're quick reads. It's got a little bit of a different editorial slant, but it's a great magazine, and it's definitely a must read every month. Their editor is Eric Roden, who is, I believe, is the chief of operations for the city of Milwaukee. No stranger to fire, very smart and articulate man. So the last fella on our list here is, we're going to call him the professor, Mr. Greg Havel. Greg, a little bit about yourself, sir.
Well, Bill, I started in the fire service about the same time you did, back in 1977. I'm with my second department now. I retired as chief from Sturtevant Volunteer Fire Department in Wisconsin, moved to Burlington, and they recruited me 3 days later. I'm presently semi-retired deputy chief of the town of Burlington Fire Department, which means I don't respond to calls anymore, but I still do administrative and training things. I teach fire service training classes for Gateway Technical College, also for FDIC. My full-time job, I'm safety director for Scherer Construction Company in Burlington. They do mostly commercial and industrial work, although they do have a custom homes division where some of the latest and not so greatest construction materials and products start showing up first.
Greg, how often do you send in another, or do your construction concern features appear in the fire engineering web?
That's twice a week, twice a month.
Okay.
Usually the first and third week, although sometimes they shift it around to the second and fourth week.
And they're quick reads by design. I mean, you could read them in, say, 5-10 minutes, which is perfect for the attention span of most firemen, me included. But, and they're archived, correct?
They are archived, although the last time the IT folks at Penwell redid the website, some of the links got lost.
Okay, but I'm sure that they're going to fix that. But how do our viewers avail themselves to your archived construction concerns?
The easiest way is to go on the fire engineering website, and in the search box up near the top of the page, type in construction concerns, and the latest ones will pop up with links, and from any of those you can access the entire library, and also you can get those in PDF format for downloading for classroom handouts or training bulletins, however you want to use them.
And Greg, they're absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. You could take, as a fire officer, we're using them as, I'm in the training division now, but when I was in the field, we would use those in our morning briefing, where we would sit around the table with a cup of coffee and go over the events of the day, the coming events of the day, and we could tackle one of your construction concerns in about 5-10 minutes. So they're a must-see if you've never seen them on the fire engineering webpage. And that's where I had the pleasure of meeting Greg. For years, I'd been looking at his construction concerns, and then I attended his classes at FDIC. I mentioned what I was teaching at FDIC this year. Greg, would you like to tell our viewers what you'll be teaching?
It's going to be a new class for me this year. It's going to be building fire behavior and building construction. I'm going to start out by comparing a building to a fireplace, which I think is going to fit right in with today's program.
You mean in a sense that every fire needs an intake and an exhaust, and if it had its way, the intake would be on the bottom and the exhaust would be at the top?
Not only that, but when was the last time you saw a fireplace made out of gypsum drywall board and 2x4s?
Gotcha. And the other one that's notorious for that is the box that surrounds the flue.
Right.
That our mutual friend had, God rest her soul, had in Delaware in that townhouse where it actually communicated, it was common to the parallel cord floor trusses. And there's actually a NIOSH report on that.
Yes.
Captain Mike Posner, what are you doing at FDIC this year?
This year I'll be teaching the ups and downs of elevators, which is going to be a class that's going to examine the vast changes in the technologies of all the different types of elevators. Going to go into fireman's service and the importance of understanding how to use this. And if you don't use it correctly, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. And it's going to get real in depth in a near miss that we had on our fire department that we'll be talking about a little bit later, as well as I'll be doing a 4-hour hot evolution rescue company operations with Captain Alvarez is our lead instructor from Maplewood. It's a live fire class involving multiple stations such as VES, controlling a fire with a can, removing down firefighters under live fire conditions. So hopefully see a lot of people at my class, and hopefully people sign up for the hot evolutions as well.
James, what will you be teaching this year?
This year I'm doing same class I did last year called What's Hiding Behind the Walls, and just kind of a look at the new buildings that are out there and change the building codes and how it's impacting our built environment.
Okay.
So I think that's Thursday, 10:30.
Very good. Looks like Captain Mike stepped away for a minute. But when here he is. He's back. Captain Mike, what are you teaching at FDIC this year, sir?
Geez, what am I not teaching? I am teaching a 4-hour workshop with Mike Galliano on Firehouse Excellent, This House Rocks. We're also doing a 1-hour 45 together on that. Then I'm doing a 4-hour workshop on drilling, how to give an effective drill as a company officer, a senior firefighter, and how to leave them wanting more from the drill. Then I am also teaching a class with Johnny Walters about firefighters needing assistance. It's called Tough Guys Sometimes Do Need Help. Okay. And then I am also teaching with my good friend Phil Paff from Australia about who has in the January Fire Engineering has 2 articles. And one of them is about our lovely friends, the cladding and the different types of cladding that we have, and which are flammable inside, and the different things that we have. So it's called What's Inside Matters, and it's about the different types of cladding and how they work. And we're going to be doing a talk on that. And Phil's going to be the lead on that, but just because he is Australian, and every time I talk to him, I have to tell him to slow down a little bit so I can understand what he's saying. I'm going to be acting as the interpreter. So you'll see me up there doing like one of those guys with the I'll be trying to interpret for the people out there what's going on and slowing him down a little bit. So I've got quite a bit going on there this year.
And then I have to say, based upon our conversations of yesterday, Chief Walter, and your article, which is absolutely excellent, we are going to either recruit you or kidnap you and get you at a future FDIC, because in a few moments I'm going to ask you to tell your story, and it's a story that needs to be heard by everyone in the fire service. Sarah, if you would put that fire department connection, it's on the exterior of the building. If you could put that picture up for just a second. We'll wait for Sarah to put the picture up. Sarah is like the Wizard of Oz. You don't see her, but she's like running the operation behind the scenes. The man behind the curtain, but she's not a man. Could bring that picture up, Sarah?
There it is.
Okay. Now I understand, Mike Dugan, that you let me touch on that. And that, okay. Reading a building. There's actually been classes on that. I know Chief Mittendorf teaches one. reading a building, what does this one view tell us? I'm looking at a fire department connection. As you can see, it's a cute little connection. It's a little cute one. It's a baby connection, and the reason is it is to supply a NFPA 13R sprinkler system. R for residential. The design of the sprinkler system, the intention, I should say, of the system is to protect the occupants. It is not to protect the building from being destroyed by fire. The biggest deficit of this system is that there is no sprinklers in the concealed spaces. Now, speaking of concealed spaces, if you'll see the Maltese cross on this, we actually got this, Chief Walter, from New Jersey. That was I think you were the first state in the country to do this, New Jersey, where this is to warn firefighters that you have an R, you have combustible, lightweight, engineered construction in the roof. In other words, trusses. And in the floors. The floors are particularly a problem because in most cases they are parallel cord floor trusses with a huge concealed space between the floor and the ceiling below. It's a lumber yard. It is undivided, prone to early collapse, and no sprinklers. And there has been, and I know you're going to touch on this, Chief Walter, several buildings that have been totally destroyed by fire. The 13R sprinkler system, Edgewater, New Jersey being probably the most notable. So that's just one shot of a building, but 13R system, don't expect much from it, and lightweight interconnected construction. So I'm going to turn things over to Chief Walter Nugent. I encourage all of you to read his article, Fire in an Unfinished Apartment Complex, Tactics That Prevented a Total Loss. So we're going to give you the floor for quite as much time as you need, Chief Walter. And again, I encourage everybody watching to avail yourself to that article. It's great lessons learned. So you have the floor, Chief Walter.
Great. Thanks, Bill. As you mentioned there, the fire we had was a large, lightweight wood frame truss constructed building. They were probably done with about 2/3 of the building at the time. 1/3 was the shell was done, and they were still all open wood members inside without any gypboard on it. At that point, we weren't 100% sure whether the walls were protected at all or not. It was pretty easy to see when that fire was progressing that there was nothing holding it back, that it was just wide open timber inside the structure. We did have what helped maintain the organization overall was just like we've mentioned before to people in fire, took about 26 companies. That's easy to, if you looked at the end result on what you're going to need to undertake a fire like this, it could be overwhelming. But if you really looked at it one step at a time, say, what could I do with the resources I have right now, which is what you should do at every fire, especially the big ones, it becomes relatively manageable. You're going to show up at the beginning with 1 or 2 companies, and our greatest concern at that point, since it was wintertime in New Jersey, it gets very cold. They had propane tanks outside. There was a combination of total of 12 450-pound propane tanks. They were sistered together in 3 different locations right next to the building on the outside. So obviously that was our greatest concern before even exposures at that point. So if we can control the fire, or at least keep those propane tanks cool, we wouldn't have to worry about any exposures at that point. And you move to exposures, and then you get to the tactics on actually considering slowing it down and then extinguishing that fire. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up, we have a few pictures. The first photo I have there, it shows a top overall of the complex from the corner. And I'm actually taking this photo is actually taken from the aerial truck overlooking the complex from our Station 2. So this is actually from the apron of the firehouse. That's how close it was from one of our firehouses. It looks like a bunch of horseshoes from this. On the right side of the photo, which you really can't see, it's just a straight run all the way down, which I'll refer to on Springfield Avenue. It's a straight run of probably near 700 to 800 feet, and a straight run. And then there's 3 horseshoes to the left, but it's all interconnected, one building. There are 2 firewalls in there that split it up according to the construction code. That would make it 3 buildings, but anybody that walks through it, there's openings in them, and it's just one very large structure.
That is all lightweight wood frame.
All lightweight wood frame. Absolutely, all lightweight wood frame construction. We were watching the thing go up little by little. We tried to take some photos along the way. You try to do the best you can on pre-planning, but you look at something like that, you know the magnitude that it's going to be, and you know, you hope, hey, if that comes in, you talk about, hey, if this ever catches fire, what's going to happen? Well, it happened, and it's in New Jersey. There's 4 shifts, 25% chance. I just so happened to be working that night. So what we had, our second photo actually shows our command post here. It's where we set up our first stew engine to try to, at that point, the first thing that was being ordered on the propane tanks, which you'll see a later photo. There's propane tanks off to the left, but right there, that photo was relatively where the fire was also stopped. At that point, we know there was a firewall in there where you see the flames coming through the ceiling. Just to the right of that, there was a firewall. We had companies in the inside of the fire, just inside the firewall on the fire side of it, waiting for the fire to come towards it. We had inspection holes prior to on the unaffected side of the firewall, and keeping an eye on that to say, hey, if it got over this firewall or remotely looked like it was coming over the firewall, all bets were off, and that you needed to get out.
And Chief, how did you know where the firewalls were? Were there parapets?
There were not parapets. Well, in the inside of these buildings, we had we were relatively familiar from some of the pre-planning that we did, but we had fortunately a lot of our companies that did come in, and a lot of them are mutual aid companies that came in with some chief officers. If you look at a building like this, you will have a majority of the time your fire door, if you have, and they spent the time to put in fire doors in the hallway. Sometimes they're on magnetic hold open devices or something, but if you're paying for fire doors, a fire door is basically useless if you don't have a firewall in that same location to each side of it. So if you're going down a hallway and you have your thick fire doors, it's a pretty good bet that your firewall is right there. They would be pretty much useless having a fire door unless there were firewalls, and that they weren't just a smoke door, say that it was actually those doors were in place at a firewall. The trick on a building under construction, there's no requirement during construction for fire doors to be closed. It's under construction. So it's a combination of, is the fire service going to get, you can't say you're going to dictate exactly how a building's going to be built, but some type of open communication to say, hey, you have these fire doors, they're there. Do they need to be left open? If you're doing construction work in that area, being a realist, you say, yeah, you have to keep them open, you do. But nighttime, after hours, if there's any doors that are already installed, especially fire doors like that, keep them closed. You know, and that's something that they could do every evening. So there's things that you could take, precautions that you could take during construction that people just say, well, that's up to the construction official. That's their job. It's not ours until they get a CO. Well, it's your job if it catches fire before they get that CO. The next photo, you could see the building. This was under construction the first time. This is prior to it ever burning. And you could see that the firewall that they did put in was actually a block wall. So it wasn't just double 5/8 sheetrock or anything like that. They did put in 2 masonry, you'll see the cinder block walls going all the way up. And that was the area that you'll see that the stop was made on. That side, the side that's not completed yet is where the on the inner part of it, which would be the right of the photo, that was the affected part of the fire. The side closest to you was not affected in the fire.
I'm going to ask Greg Havel, would you enlighten us on how much you increase the fire resistance of a concrete block firewall if you fill the cells with concrete, if any?
It depends on the application and the block you're using. If the block is UL labeled as for use in firewalls. Filling the cores isn't going to really increase the fire resistance. Although if you fill the cores with grout and rebar, in effect, you're turning it into a reinforced concrete wall rather than just masonry.
Okay, so you could increase your fire resistance, but no, you opened my eyes. I had no idea that there was actually rated concrete block intended for firewalls.
The interesting thing is, the stickers usually are on the shrink wrap that covers the pallet of block. They're not on most of the individual block themselves. There are a few that'll have the UL stamp on. Once they're laid up, you'll never see that again. It's like the rating labels on drywall board. It's on the inside of the wall. Unless you break the wall open, you can't see it after it's finished.
Mm-hmm.
Chief Walter, obviously this took a tremendous fire flow. How are the hydrants and the water mains in that area?
Well, beside that, the photo that was up there was on Springfield Avenue, or referred to, is a very main thoroughfare. There was, we had no water concerns at all on that side of the building. That's where we brought a majority of our water in from. That was one of our, as I refer to in the article, one of the fortunate circumstances. And I realized the strengths and weaknesses, and the water supply was one of the strengths. The fact that it was, the fire was on a major thoroughfare made it very easy for companies that were coming from a distance, both from the east and the west, to find it. Besides, they could just look up and see the flames, but it was easy to get to. There weren't too many turns once you got onto, or referring to, Springfield Avenue, which is a clear shot for many of our mutual aid companies. But water being brought in from there was not a problem. If you came in from the opposite direction, was our center part of town, and there are greater concerns there, which we were familiar with because we just knew that side of town did have greater challenges for the water than what we had on this side. So water supply wasn't a problem in this scenario, fortunately.
Well, it looks to me like the pre-planning paid off, and you know, Chief, that a building is never more vulnerable than when it is under construction, and as Chief Mike knows, just as vulnerable when it's under destruction, such as the Deutsche Bank building fire.
Yep.
And it's not unreasonable to expect our people to go almost on a daily basis to see the progression of either construction or demolition. And it sounds to me like you fellas did your homework with pre-fire planning, Chief.
The pre-planning helped, and there was a great heads up, like I said, from companies and chief officers that were in that building. And I had been approached from my first 2 captain that came out and said, listen, we're at the firewall. It's not near us yet. If this is going to get slowed up, that's the only chance we're going to have. And obviously knowing it was, you toss and contemplate both things. It is a vacant building. It's under construction. There's no life risk. Some people might look at it and say, what are you doing in the building? There's no reason to be in it. The fire is big. If it did get to this Springfield Avenue side, could have very well jumped the street at that point. Gas stations on the other side, residential homes. But if we did not stop it at that firewall, that was the only chance that we had. And we were able to just make that our only chance at possibly saving that. But I give a lot of credit to some of those companies inside. We talk in Anthony Ovilla's book that I reference in there, the Fire Strategies, on getting the recon from the interior companies. If you get good information from your companies inside the building, you're able to make better decisions outside of the building. And that's a lot of what happened at this building also. They said, hey, we're here. We're at the wall. They were just looking at me to say, okay, I'll give you a couple minutes. Let's see how this is going to work out, and work accordingly from that point.
You know, when I get off of this hangout today, I got to go back. I'm doing the officer development program for the new captains, but I'm definitely going to go back and just tell them that, you know, the captain is usually the highest ranking officer in a building, and sounds to me like I had a guy that you could count on, and he was your eyes and ears. And what he saw had a direct effect on your strategy, which was to cut off the fire at that firewall. How many linear feet of firewall did you have to cover with hose lines on the opposite side? And how did you know that indeed the firewall was intact?
Well, the firewall, they were not at the firewall. We knew there were only 2 firewalls in the building. And the first firewall was breached almost immediately because it was very near where the fire started, and it was very near where the construction. It's debatable on exactly why it got through at that point as quick as it did, but without having the resources at that point, and where that actually started, that first wall would have definitely been unrealistic. And this was the only other of the firewalls. And like I said, you go down and you got this huge hallway, and there's only 2 sets of double doors, and you're at it. That was their firewall was there. We had, fortunately, also we had some being from a small career fire department in New Jersey. We relied on the mutual aid companies coming in from a lot from Essex County, some from Union County. They come in. They do come with some chief officers, some mutual aid coordinators who were able to go in that building on the top floor. Wave in. I have some other pictures of the aerials that set up on the side of the building. They were able to look out the windows from the right side, call the companies up on the radio, keep going, keep going, keep going, stop. Because they were also looking out the other window to know where that fire progression was and where they needed to stage the apparatus. It's very rare to be able to have almost a heads up, like an aerial view of someone who's calling the shots and stage an apparatus from the interior of a structure. And that was definitely part of it that helped on this placement of the 3 aerials we had on the other side of the building to know where to do proper placement.
Now, Captain Mike, you spent a lot of time on a tower ladder, I do believe. Is that correct? You weren't on a tower.
Never. Listen, they tell you, don't take the elevator, take the stairs. Aerial never failed. You never failed to get a firefighter to the roof on an aerial.
Yeah.
Tower ladders fail.
I'm thinking about that. You had the foresight, and your folks had the foresight that the fire didn't get past you. It looks to me like you stayed ahead of the fire and projected its progression conservatively, pessimistically, and got ahead of it and to buy you time to make a stand. Would I be accurate in saying that?
It was, but let me say, early on, the fire, I could say the fire was definitely beating us when we arrived, and you only had 2, 3, 4 companies. The fire was moving quicker than we were, and I think the one thing you could attribute to that is you just have to be careful on a fire of this magnitude. If you don't make any big mistakes early, you say, well, what did you do right? Well, if you didn't do anything wrong, if you didn't place the vehicle so close that you were bubbling the paint and then needed to relocate it and then redo anything, if you don't make a big mistake early, there's a pretty good chance that the right things are going to happen as you proceed through things. So by staging in an area that if the fire did almost come curbside and almost flank us, we had the opening right at where the water supply was on that first engine, that it was in a relatively protected area, that it was okay, our water source was okay. The aerial, we were starting to place it closer at the beginning and relocated it before lines were hooked up to it on the corner of the building to look out for an exposure. Initially, we definitely thought you could set it up in the middle of this property, and that's when we realized there couldn't have been any drywall on this because the fire was racing almost as quick as we were able to move that ladder to the corner of the property, and it was a very quick change. But we identified early to get that out to the side. So we did see the fire progressing quicker than us, at least at the beginning. And then you have to work accordingly and make changes accordingly.
Is 4 stories the maximum in your area that you can have for wood frame construction? I see Mike is shaking.
It's a combination 4 and 5. You could have a small percentage of 5-story, and this had a very small percentage of 5-story, with the largest percentage being 4-story. It was a combination of 4 and 5, but for the rule of thumb, 4 is correct. But if you count the windows on one small side of the building, they were able to get 5, and on a small section.
You want to show us some more of the pictures?
All right, I believe the next ones we showed, that was a firewall under construction. The next one, you'll actually see a picture in the unit that's closest.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit.
The opposite side. See the seat watch, just a picture, sticking the camera basically up into that hole, and you'll see at the peak the lightweight wood that's up there, and you could start to see. Not sure how good on this the computer you'll see it, but up in the top corner you'll start to see some black staining up there in the photo of the smoke starting to get through, but we're able to maintain, like you're able to slow this down, a combination of the aerials, the hand lines that were on the opposite side of this wall to slow it down, but there's obviously some embers and some smoke that was getting past you, and that's what the firewall was catching, because you'll see that you'll be able to catch the majority of a fire, but if you only need a little bit to pass you for fire to light up on the other side. The firewall caught, I would say, probably a majority of the smaller stuff because we were on the other side, but you can't stop it all with hose lines. When we had our backup firewall, and the guys were up front on the extinguishment, and the backup of that firewall was able to hold it.
I think you have a close-up of don't you have the firewall?
Yeah, there is a close-up in that. The next photo, there it is. If you look into that, you'll see the block on the one side, and right in the corner you see the spray fire foam in there, and you can see it's starting to darken a little bit. A couple little bit of smoke staining and embers starting to get through that point. So you didn't have a ton more extra time. We were holding it. If you saw anything other than this, if it got worse, that was it. There was no other stand after this, and it just would have took the whole complex.
I'm looking at the ridge, and it looks like it burnt right up. You have some burn marks right up, right at the ridge.
Yeah. It's starting to. We were at the. It would have been a very different article.
Man,
it was close, but by watching it, you say that obviously the greatest concern is the firefighter safety. It was a vacant building. You were structurally sound where they were located. We knew where they were and who was in that building at that point. And we were able to watch to make sure the fire never got up and behind them at that point by having these inspection halls and open up. You would have been guessing to think, hey, I think we got it, but never really knowing if you didn't open up and have somebody watching it.
You brought up an interesting point in your article about, having a exterior defensive attack with heavy streams and having firefighters operating in the building at the firewalls, in a sense, goes against the grain of conventional thought. But at this fire, it worked because, in my estimation, you're actually, when you have a firewall, you're looking at two different buildings.
You're looking at two different. You're looking at two different buildings. That's why I started with that aerial shot, that the building's built of like multiple pods were so relatively far apart from one another that you were able to direct those master streams and the outside streams on that one section of a section of the building without really being anywhere near that section of the building where firefighters were operating. And when something like this was venting to that degree, those lines were nowhere near where the firemen were. There was no chance of hitting a fire, which traditionally, I've learned, my whole career, you don't put water on from the outside when guys are inside. You're going to push fire, team them. You're going to do that. This was vented out the roof in the sections where the master streams were hitting. There was no life of any type in that area where these lines were flowing, and definitely not any firefighters.
Any pictures for us, Walter? Any other pictures? There we go.
Oh, all right. That's the next picture there. That is the firewall. You could see if you get a good enough shot of that firewall right to the left, that first area, which is off to the left, that tower.
Yes.
That's operating just on the opposite side of the firewall also. That brick wall of one of those first fires, first photos I showed you had the that brick wall's actually right to the left of that initial ladder truck there. So they're operating on the fire side of the firewall, okay? And that was the positioning. You see the picture up there, the lights on the top floor off to the left. That's where his chief officers were guiding and placing those apparatus, looking over the other side to say, hey, this is where you need to be, the way where they needed to be. And that's where they positioned them So those were shooting over the building in that direction, and the other guys came and were just inside the wall, which would have been right to the left of that platform, but inside of the just inside of the firewall. And there's this second aerial you could see, and a little further down, you might just see the just a water pattern of a third aerial that's even further down, but you can't even see the apparatus at that point. But that's how long that stretch of the building is. But the placement there to see, and you'll see later on, I took a photo of the property the day after, that this side of the building shows no fire damage. Next photo of the same shot, and
that kept
I the 28 by 10 and had a good amount of resources early on, and good placement. A few then in our favor. So I was going to mention a little bit more. We had the wind was blowing towards the rear of the complex, opposite the command post, which was this complex's parking deck, and the building next door's parking deck also. There was one section of the building that got close to the other parking deck, but our exposure to what the rear side of the building was for the most part parking decks. If there were one family homes to the rear of absolutely different fire for all of what can be built. We were fortunate; it was their parking deck, the other a complex parking deck near one another, instead of parking decks alone. But if we had a row of one-family homes, and this was being built, or if this is built in the middle of a town with one-family homes basically surrounding it, it would have been completely different. The fire would have been jumping. It was a huge help that we had not too many people could say they just fortunately had a parking deck behind them, but it did play into account. That photo right there, that is the day after the fire. So to say it's a lightweight wood structure, the day after that much fire, being that close to it, was still standing. That was, like I said, we were very fortunate for some of the circumstances that we had work our way. Many times people will say, "Hey, you see these types of fires, and they're not stopped." I could definitely understand how, because if I had there were a couple different circumstances, this one wouldn't have been either. This should have the firewall where we were, the early resources, the companies that came in, the parking deck in the back, a huge benefit. You'll see the next photo actually shows pictures. The next photo actually shows the two parking. Oh, okay, no, it's one sooner. I'm sorry, this was the propane tanks. This was one of the early photos of one of the members when we said managing, said what your priorities are at a fire. Oh, when you had this right next to the building, that was little burning members falling and landing on some of these propane tanks. Lines on those propane tanks were obviously the first lines that we had to pull. And there's the propane tanks that the member was firing on. Those are 450-pound propane tanks, 4 of them sistered together, and they were in 3 different locations, relatively close to one another. But obviously that was our first concern, was the, all right, then we moved on. The other one shows you down the alley, that building to the right there, that is the distance between the parking garage. That's the exposure on the right is our exposure, and on the left is the complex itself. That's showing, that is about a little over 20-foot span. So you had, like I said, any wood structures on the other side, and not 2 parking decks facing one another. It would have been completely different.
Yeah.
And this was actually a photo op for Glenn Corbett. Took actually most of these photos were from Pad Photography, fortunately from Hackensack, who was kind enough to give me access to some excellent shots.
This looks like
This
an
was actually
improvised
Corbett
pipe.
Yeah, the exterior standpipe we had. There were standpipes, and we were able to do certain things within the building, but this was just a 2.5. You drop some webbing down from the top balcony, bring up the 2.5, tied off the gated Y to the balcony, and took some high-rise lines from the balcony in, and it worked very well. This was an area we're just the thing, but as the professor Glenn over there did enough for the photo, and it was just something to a box using the exterior standpipe as we refer to them.
Great, great. Captain Mike Dugan, sir, I talked to you on Sunday, and when we think of New York City, we usually think about old, substantial buildings, but we don't have the opportunity to get in them the way that you do. And we were talking just briefly about some of the hybrid buildings, old and new, old buildings that are renovated, and some of the trends that you're starting to see within neighborhoods that traditionally had old, solid construction with dimensional lumber. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Captain Mike?
Sure. Well, I mean, land is at a premium in New York City. Areas that used to be, Williamsburg used to be a dump. It was all commercial. It's now one of the hottest neighborhoods in the city of New York. And you can't buy anything there. There are now buildings in Williamsburg built out of containers on top of each other, 5 and 6 stories of containers tied together, multiple dwellings made out of containers. They're all over. The metal stamped trusses with the openings in them to allow them to run the plumbing through the plumbing, all the wiring through these metal trusses. You never know when they renovate a building if they're going to go. We have a couple of buildings where it's a 4-story building and they want to go 6 stories. So it's wood up to the 4th floor. 5th and 6th, it's going to be lightweight materials because they want to keep the weight down because it was only originally designed for 4. And they do it with micro lambs and all of the other stuff. So it depends on what you get there. That's why you have to go out and look at some of these buildings. In my neighborhood, there's a house that started out as a 20 by 40 little shack. And I think the guy must have hit the lottery because he put on about 7,000 square feet of additional space. There is one part of this house that is ordinary dimensional lumber. And if you go in as a firefighter, put a hook in the ceiling, you're going to think it's dimensional lumber. Then you go to any other part of the house, it's lightweight wooden trusses. So this is happening throughout the country.
Big difference. Big difference. Mike Posner, Captain Mike.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us just briefly what was your motivation to start this elevator training?
I started the elevator training about 3 years ago. One of our battalion chiefs asked if I could help him come up with something that we don't do too often. Came up with an elevator class, but before I developed this class, I did a lot of research, met with a lot of experts. I actually became best friends with the Dade County chief elevator inspector, who I spent numerous weeks with learning stuff about elevators before I would attempt to give any of this information out to any of the firefighters. The drill was really well received, and I didn't understand why until I started asking everybody. And very few fire departments give any sort of elevator training to their guys. So fast forward about a year, about 2 years ago to this date, we had a near miss where we could have had a firefighter or an entire crew killed responding on an alarm ringing in a high rise. And after that incident, I really stepped up the research and the elevator training on our department.
Yeah, and it is a valuable lesson to be learned. And I'm going to twist your arm and get you to write an article for Fire Engineering on it. And by all means, for those of you that are going to FDIC, make sure you catch Mike's class. I'm just going to give you a teaser. But, you know, we're told to go to, before we perform an elevator evacuation or rescue, to shut off the main disconnect. And you learn that might not be the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
So,
we had a huge lesson we learned. Huge lesson we learned on brakes.
And it was a very close call. James, we're gonna switch gears here now, because we've been talking lightweight construction with Chief Walter. Now there's an article this month from some fellas in your neck of the woods there, I guess literally when we're talking British Columbia neck of the woods, and about massive timber buildings. For instance, cross-laminated timber. And can you enlighten us on that? Because there is an argument to be made that, hey, you know, it's wood, and you know we're going to have taller buildings. We could have high-rise buildings. Well, to me, it's just my estimation, my opinion, is you're better off with the massive timber construction, the glulam and the cross-laminated timbers, than you were with the toothpick towers like Chief Walter has to contend with. What's your feelings on that, James?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. In the city I work for, Vancouver, we have an 18-story mass timber building that just completed this past year. So it's 1-story podium concrete construction, and then 17 stories of mass timber above that. It's actually student housing at a University of British Columbia. But it was the first one of its kind around here. So they definitely took additional safety precautions when they did it. So every wood surface is covered by 3 layers of 5/8 Type X gypsum board. So there's no exposed wood in it. Sprinklers throughout. As they were building it, in British Columbia, we have a law that says during construction, you have to have a standpipe operational, or a standpipe that's ready for operation 1 floor below the floor that's under construction. And Walter, you were just talking about the fire doors. For that building, as they were building it, they had to have the fire doors intact on each floor as they were going up with it. But yeah, this it is a totally different animal. Here in British Columbia, we can build up to 6-story toothpick towers or light wood frame. Up until last year, anything up to 4 stories would be a 13R system. And actually, last year, it was last year, I came home from night shift. I was sleeping. I woke up to the smell of heavy smoke in my apartment. I look out the window, and there was a 4-story wood frame right across from me that was going right through the roof. So they lost the whole top floor of that building, and that was a 13R system. And shortly after that, they amended the protocol here in British Columbia that anything up 4 stories and above now has to be a full 13 system. So for those that don't know the difference, the void spaces then will have to have sprinkler heads in it as well and be protected.
Greg, you've been listening to all of this, and you bring a lot of years of experience to the table. Looking at it from a construction superintendent's point of view, the location of the firewalls, the progression of the construction. One thing that frustrates us in the fire service, as you know, is that the building is in, they might have multiple parts of the building, but they're all in the same stage of construction. And I know that's necessary in the construction industry. But, you know, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but what do you think, from a construction industry point of view, what could they be doing, if anything, to prevent these conflagrations while these lightweight buildings are under construction?
Construction needs to be phased more often. The company I work for frequently will start one end of the building, and they will frame it and begin drywalling before they begin framing the next part. And by the time they get to framing the last part of the building on that floor, they will actually be installing room finishes, painting, wood trim, carpeting, and so on. And by that time, the fire doors are hung. Fire doors, incidentally, in most buildings are some of the last things to be hung, just like any other door, because construction workers aren't always as careful as they could be, and things get banged up. And the fire door, when it's hung, that's what's going to be there for the life of the building until it's remodeled. Phasing the construction is one thing, and a little better training on the part of the unions on fire protection systems for the buildings under construction. There are many construction workers, all they know is a fire extinguisher is that red thing hanging on the wall there that's always getting in the way. They don't know, haven't been trained how to use it. Some fire departments do come out and train construction workers, others don't. One advantage that in this part of the country we have is many construction workers are volunteer firefighters, and there are at least some people on site who have had training. Just a comment on the mass timber. James was saying that they've got multiple layers of gypsum drywall board protecting all of the mass timber components. The way it's advertised, it has a fire rating without the gypsum board protecting it. And if you believe what the marketing people read, it does have a fire rating, but my response to that is, at what point does the char on the wood start eating into the safety factor and potentially cause a structural collapse? The gyp board is a real good idea.
That's something in Canada, they just put out for public comment, the latest version of the National Building Code of Canada. And in that, they actually called for certain walls to be left exposed as part of that. So I know there was a fair bit of public comment that was provided against that, because that's the only reason for that is purely aesthetics. They just want to have that exposed wood surface. So it's something that's on the horizon. I believe that's something coming up with the International Building Code as well.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes. We're right at the end. Chief Walter, I understand you have a couple more pictures, 3 pictures. Did you want to quickly go through those? Is that possible now, Sarah? Go ahead. You're muted right now, Walter.
The example was just a few other, it was just showing the, if a building's under construction and it's just surrounded by one-family homes, your exposure, which we talked about before, is just, your scenario is catastrophically different. When you're building ordinary construction, if you're building brick first, the hazard's at least inside and has that protected area. You're building this wood sheathing on the outside and everything inside is wood. It's just, like you said, a big pile of sticks. And that's the difference. And if you have this fire load, which is just a standing lumber yard, and then you try to have homes next to it, you're not going to be able to stop that fire before it takes out your exposures very quickly. This was a distant picture. You could actually run through them very quick if you have them up already.
Go ahead, Sarah. Run those other pictures through.
The last one, Sarah, I think has the closest picture of the one-family home, how close it is to it. Oh, and you could say tactically wise, if this had that fire load, it would be near impossible to protect the structures in that area. And the block, which I didn't have a photo of, the opposite side is just lined with one-family homes. So and I had a parking garage. So it would be completely different. And on the side you're looking at has a parking lot, but the other side, there's just a row of homes. It's the middle of Jersey City with they had 3 foot behind each one-family home, and they were right on the opposite side of the street of this building.
You know, when I look at this, you have to be awfully proud of your people. You have to be, and have every reason to be proud of not just your department, but the mutual aid companies. What a fantastic job, because there have been bigger departments than yours that have lost these buildings. And I know you say you were lucky, Chief Walter, but, you know, you make your own luck sometimes with pre-fire planning and good reconnaissance, good communications, and good apparatus spotting. You know, that's not just luck. That's a calculation. And I got to take my hat off to you guys. Great article this month in January's Fire Engineering. This could easily be a 2-hour session. Again, our sponsor is FDIC. If you've never gone to FDIC, believe me, you will not be disappointed. This is just like a tiny taste of what you would experience for 3-4 days at FDIC. And you have some of the best names in the business. And again, I encourage you to go to Construction Concerns on the Fire Engineering webpage. Subscribe to Fire Engineering either in the digital or the print. I like the print because I can take it into the bathroom with me. Okay. So, and but if it's short articles, I'll take fire rescue in the bathroom with me instead because the articles are shorter. It depends upon what I ate the night before. So, how much fiber was in it? So, everybody, fellas, very quickly, Walter, God bless you and your fellas on the Maplewood Fire Department. Shout out to Joey Alvarez for making the connection. Captain Mike Dugan, as always, thanks for having my back, taking care of me. Mike Posner, my very best to you and the hang glider. Leave it at that. James, you know, James is, I think everybody knows that James is a drummer in an Irish punk rock band. I think you can tell from the hair. And God bless you, brother. And I'm looking forward, Professor Havel, to having dinner with you in Indianapolis. There she is. There she is. Excellent. Excellent. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. All our brothers and sisters in the fire service, keep your heart and your head in your job. Stay healthy, stay safe, and God bless you, and may He keep you safe.